Hello. Today, I have yet again redone something with AI, but this time it is The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. At first, I used the lyrics of Jeff Wayne's musical version, but then realized that I could use the copy of the novel I owned. So, this is a mixture of both, and the first few chapters are heavily inspired by the musical. 1. The Eve of the War. As the clock struck midnight to welcome the dawn of the 20th century, no one could have imagined the danger that lay ahead. Mankind, too busy with their own concerns, had never considered the possibility of foreign threats from the depths of outer space, and so went on with their lives in complete assurance of their power over the known world. But unbeknownst to them, they were being studied by powerful alien intelligences, whose minds far surpassed theirs in every way. Like the vast difference between an ant and a human under a microscope, they saw and calculated their every movement. It was these watchful forces that would soon prove mankind's undoing. I gasped as I witnessed the events before me. At midnight, on the 12th of August, a huge mass of luminous gas erupted from Mars and began hurtling towards Earth. Ogilvy, the astronomer, held his telescope and reassured me of our safety. He declared that there could be no living thing on Mars, no cause for concern here on Earth. But the next day, a huge crater rested in the middle of the common, and evidence of a strange cylinder, 30 yards across and glowing hot, could be seen. Ogilvy ran forward, fear in his face. Was there a person inside, trying to escape? He neared the cylinder, but the intense heat stopped him before he could reach it. As we watched, the top of the cylinder began to move, rotating and unscrewing. Ogilvy and I both held our breath, waiting to see who or what might emerge. We were mesmerized by the scene before us, as if the world around us halted mid-stride. Even with the sudden disaster before us, the world outside seemed so distant and undisturbed. We could hear the railway station, the sound of trains ringing and rumbling, seemingly playing a soft melody in the background. It all felt so strange and surreal, the intense heat and fear around us, yet the night feeling so tranquil and peaceful. It was as if the two states could not exist together, but here we were, in this moment of uncertainty. Will we be safe? I finally murmured, my voice barely audible in the still night air. Ogilvy looked back at me, his eyes glinting with determination. Yes, he exclaimed firmly, we will be safe. 2. On Horsel Common. Next morning, a crowd gathered on the common, hypnotized by the unscrewing of the cylinder. I was among them, mesmerized by the muted hum of the machinery as it slowly turned and revealed 2 feet of shining screw. Tilting my head, I noticed a few young men had ventured closer towards the pit. It felt like an eternity before the lid suddenly fell off. With a soft crack it shattered and all of us jumped. The cylinder seemed to rise into a huge, rounded bulk, larger than a bear, until 2 luminous disc-like eyes appeared above the rim. Its lipless mouth quivered and slathered, and snake-like tentacles writhing as the clumsy body heaved and pulsated. What is that thing? One young man shouted in fear. He was answered by a sudden bright glare and a loud roar of heat, as each man was instantly turned to fire. Everyone in the crowd screamed and yelled as the terrible heat ray hissed across the common, turning every tree and bush into a mass of flames. I felt terror coursing through my veins as I clawed my way off the common. I ran as fast as I could, the unexpected attack of the Martian creature seared in my mind. I was sure I was being toyed with, and that this mysterious death would catch up with me soon. At last, I reached Mayberry Hill and stumbled towards my home. Shaking in fear, I sat down to write an account of the horror I had witnessed on the common. Hours passed, and as I readied myself for sleep, I heard the distant sounds of hammering from the pit. The next morning, I went straight to the railway station to buy the newspaper. I looked around me, the daily routine of life was carrying on as if nothing had happened. Little did they know, I thought to myself, the horror we had encountered under the cover of night. Later that day, while I was still processing what had transpired the previous night, a company of soldiers marched in and deployed along the edge of the common, to form a cordon. That evening there was a violent crash, and I realized with despair that my home was now within reach of the Martian's heat ray. I had to do something. And then, in the morning again, a falling star with a trail of green mist, landed with a flash like summer lightning. This was the second cylinder. This time I did not stay to witness the unfolding events. Gathering the courage I had found, I ran to my neighbors and told them what had happened, and we decided to take refuge in a nearby cave. From the safety of the cave, we watched the towering shapes of the two cylinders, illuminated under the morning sun. We watched and waited, our hearts in our throats, until the morning light faded, and the stars joined together to shine bright in the night sky. 3. The Artilleyman and the Fighting Machine. The sound of hammering from the pits and the pounding of guns filled the air. My fear rose as I heard movement coming from the cave. Out from the darkness stepped a young artilleryman, weary and dirty with streaks of blood on him. He looked around and spoke, his voice heavy with exhaustion and sadness. "Anyone here? Come in and drink this," he said, offering me a canteen. "What's happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They wiped us out," he said, his eyes wide with shock and sorrow. "Hundreds dead, maybe thousands. The Martians, they had machines they had built, metal things on legs with hoods over their heads. They attacked us and slaughtered us, using their machines to pick up men and bash them against trees. Nothing we did could stop them." I remained quiet, my mind spinning. "Another cylinder came last night," I said, thinking of Carrie in London. "Yes, it looked bound for there. Your family might be in danger," he said. My heart sank. Without another thought, I spoke. "I must go to London at once." The artilleryman nodded. "Yes, and I must report to headquarters, if there's anything left of it. We need to act fast if we are to have any chance at defeating them." I nodded and grabbed my pack. Together, we ventured into the unknown, our fate uncertain as we raced against the machines towards London. I looked toward the inn and saw something that filled me with dread. The windows were all broken, the doors were hanging off the hinges, but the biggest surprise was the 6 cannons lined up in the courtyard. "Is everybody dead?" the artilleryman asked, his voice tinged with fear. I shook my head. "Not everybody. Look, 6 cannons with gunners standing by their posts. Bows and arrows against the lightning," he muttered. "They haven't seen the heat ray yet." He strode forward, pushing aside the broken door and stepped into the courtyard. We followed at a cautious distance, expecting an ambush at any second. But there was no one. The gunners simply stood there, as if frozen in time, their weapons aimed at the empty skies. The artilleryman let out a low whistle. "Didn't expect to find this here," he murmured. "No, me neither," I agreed. I stumbled forward, racing as fast as my feet could take me along the road to Weybridge. Suddenly, the calmness of the night was disturbed by a heavy explosion. The ground shook and windows shattered, and gusts of smoke erupted in the air. I stopped and looked back to find my companion, the artilleryman, pointing up the river towards the other side. "Look! There they are. What did I tell you?" he yelled as 4 of the fighting machines appeared from the darkness. Monstrous tripods, higher than the tallest steeple, striding over pine trees and smashing them as they advanced. Walking engines of glistening metal, each of them with a huge funnel. Immediately I recognized those awful machines from the stories I had heard. The 5th machine soon appeared on the far bank. It raised itself to full height and flourished the funnel high in the air, directing waves of heat and energy towards the sleeping town. The other 4 machines exulted, releasing deafening howls that roared like thunder. Just then, the 6 guns we had seen fired simultaneously at the first machine, decapitating it. Amidst the smoke, I could see the body of the Martian inside the hood, splashed to the four winds and nothing more than an intricate device of metal. Unfortunately, that distraction was not enough. Before I knew it, the formidable heat ray swept across the river, scalding and half-blinding me. While still in agonizing pain, I desperately forced myself up onto the shore. As I lay there, helpless and exposed, I expected nothing but death. To my surprise, however, I saw the feet of the Martians as they lifted the remnants of their dead comrade and continued their advance. Miraculously, I had been spared. With the last ounce of energy left in me, I willed my legs forward and hurried along the road to Weybridge. I had never felt so grateful and relieved in my life. 4. How I fell in with the curate. After escaping the Martians, I found myself standing in front of a curate sitting alone. I hesitantly approached him and asked, "Excuse me, Father. Do you mind if I sit down?" "Of course," the curate replied. I took a seat next to him and started talking with him. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. "The Martians are the punishment of God," he said quietly. My mouth dropped open. Was I really hearing this? "What do you mean?" I asked, shaking my head in confusion. The curate began explaining that God was punishing mankind for their sins. He said that the Martians were God's way of taking revenge on the human race. I listened attentively to his words, feeling stunned by this new information. After a long chat about the Martians, I thanked the curate for his insight. He wished me luck on my journey, and I thanked him again before getting up to leave. Then, I had an idea. "I'm actually traveling to London to find my friend Carrie," I blurted out. "Would you like to come along? It would be an honor to have you as my guide." The curate thought for a moment before nodding his head. "Yes, I believe I will join you," he said with a smile. We set off together and I was thankful for the curate's company as the journey to London was long and dangerous. Little did I know, this journey would take us further than either of us had ever imagined. 5. In London. When my brother Tom first entered London, he was stunned at the destruction caused by the heat rays. The buildings had been reduced to rubble, their bricks scattered across the asphalt like a scattered deck of cards. Any hopes of staying alive felt slim to none. But my brother had courage. He walked with conviction, determined to make it out alive, and set off down the street. Suddenly, in the far distance, my brother saw an eerie shape appearing on the horizon. Illuminated by the setting sun, he could see the giant tripod of a Martian looming above the skyline. People all around him ran in panic, screaming and crying in terror at the large mechanical creature. My brother steeled himself and pressed forward, never once turning away from the monstrosity. His courage and determination gave him an edge, and he was able to make it out of the city unscathed. I had never seen my brother with such courage before, and it filled me with an inexplicable pride. Tom walked through the streets of London, alone and vulnerable. Everywhere he looked were scenes of destruction and despair. He stepped over piles of rubble and debris, and occasionally had to push through the masses of terrified people. Even though he could hardly keep moving, he continued on, his face haunted with the memory of the Martians' deadly heat rays. As he walked, he could feel the tension in the air, and almost instinctively he knew that he and his brother were far from welcome. Everywhere he turned his face was met with dark glances and snarls. He was a stranger here, just like the Martians that had destroyed the city. He understood their fear and anger, but it still did little to protect him from the harshness of their stares. Suddenly, he was plucked from the crowd and thrown against the side of an old building. "Who are you?" a voice growled. Tom looked up to see a scowling man towering above him, his cold eyes narrowed onto his. Tom felt his heart pounding fast, and then he heard himself blurt out, "I am Tom." The man stepped back, his expression relaxing a bit. "Oh," he said, and Tom saw sympathy in his gaze. "Tom," he repeated, and although his face was still stern, his voice was gentle. Tom felt a wave of relief rush through him. He was no longer alone in the chaos of the London streets. Somehow, a little steamer was sending people away. Tom looked up and nodded to the man. His lips started to quiver, and tears began to pour from his eyes. "Take me to it," he said, and the man nodded in understanding. The man offered his hand and Tom took it, relieved to finally feel safe. His brother was here, and he wasn't alone. For the first time in days, he felt the weight of despair on his chest slowly start to drift away. 6. The Thunder Child. Tom, the man, and the rest of the survivors had saved themselves from the destruction of London, but their hopes of victory had been lost. As they watched the little steamer sail away, far on the horizon appeared the silhouettes of Martian fighting machines. "It's no use," said Tom, stepping forward. "They'll take it down, sooner or later. We have to find another way out." The man nodded, his face hard and determined. "Maybe that ironclad over there, that might help if they turn it on." His brother gave a grim smile in agreement. As they hastily started, they heard a terrible roar rising from the landward horizon. More and more Martian fighting machines marched towards them, their heat rays ready to strike. The little steamer made her way away from shore, while in the distance the Thunder Child awoke from her silent languor, rising from the depths like a guardian angel. Bravely she sailed towards the enemy, cannons blasting and defiantly firing her resources at the sinister enemy. The Martians released their black smoke, shrouding the sea in its suffocating blanket, but the Thunder Child stood her ground, cutting down one of the tripod figures with every shot. She had become the beacon of hope, and soon the sound of cheering rose from the survivors on the steamer. The sight of the brave warship distracted the Martians from their advancing, allowing the little steamer to escape to the safety of the misty horizon. But, before the darkness could envelop the Thunder Child, the Martians' heat rays had melted her heroic heart, sinking her forever and engulfing the last vestige of hope for mankind. The sky glittered with sickening green flashes, as cylinder after cylinder plummeted from the atmosphere, marking the end of an era. With no one and nothing left to save them, the earth was under the Martians. 7. Underfoot. The Curate and I had been running for days. The Martians had destroyed our city as well as many others, and we were tasked with getting out before the invaders could reach us. We had no food, no shelter, and our supplies were quickly running out. We were exhausted and desperate but determined to survive. We stumbled upon an abandoned house at the edge of a remote forest. The doors were unlocked, so we cautiously entered. Inside, the house was filled with musty air and seemed safe enough. We decided to stay and rest, knowing we had to be careful not to be discovered. As nightfall approached, the red weeds began to grow outside the windows, covering the landscape as far as the eye could see. It was an unsettling sight, and I could tell the Curate was growing increasingly nervous. He grabbed his Bible and began to read out prayers in a trembling voice. "Lord, give us strength to face this darkness. And let us never forget that your love is greater than the evil that has befallen us," he said. I looked out the window and felt a sudden sense of peace. Despite the danger we were in, I knew that as long as we had faith, we would get through this. The two of us stayed awake for a long time, discussing what our next steps would be and trying to come up with a plan. Eventually, the exhaustion of the day got the best of us, and we both drifted off to sleep. The next morning, we awoke to find the red weeds had spread even further, blocking out the sun and casting a deep shadow over the house. In every direction there were no signs of people, just an eerie red carpet of weeds as far as the eye could see. We decided it was best to stay put and try to keep ourselves safe until we could figure out our next move. 8. What we saw in the ruined house. It had been 5 full days since my companion the Curate and I had been holed up inside this abandoned house, trying to hide from the Martians that had recently invaded and tenuously taken control of Earth. The red weed continued to expand as far as the eye could see outside our windows, stretching out until it blocked all sight of the horizon. We had been living off what little food had been left behind by the previous occupants of the house, and our time was spent mostly in deep discussion about what was to become of us now that the Martians had taken over. At night, I'd peer out through the blackout curtains, surveying the land and praying for a sign that the human race could survive, but I never had a shred of hope. But then, on the third day of our hideout, we heard a peculiar drumming noise coming from outside, and it kept on going for the entirety of the morning. I turned to the curate and said, "What could that possibly be? It doesn't sound like anything I've heard before." Just then, my curiosity got the best of me, and I carefully peeled back one of the curtains to get a better look. As soon as I did, my eyes widened at what I saw before me. Standing in a large open field and illuminated by the sunlight of a new morning were no less than 15 giant machines in the shape of Martian war machines. But these were not meant to wage battle. Instead, they stood still and silent, and as I watched, I saw that some of them were suckling up the blood from the humans that had gathered around them and spitting it out into the soil. I gasped at the horror of it all. "Look," I said, pointing out the window. "They're using us like so much fertilizer." The curate's eyes bulged, and he grasped my arm tightly. "What are they doing?" he asked. I shook my head in disbelief. "They're using our blood as a food source. It's some kind of sustenance for their red weed." The curate backed away from the window and muttered a quick prayer. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice quavering. "We can't." I whispered to him. "There is no place that shows shelter." 9. The death of the curate. The great machine, which spewed out a thick, red mist over the land, had left me in an abandoned home for days. The curate and I had sought shelter here, hoping to outrun the Martians. The very thought of Martians was difficult to comprehend, but my reality had changed. Even our fear of them was trumped by our need to understand their ultimate plan. We had heard rumors about what they had done to our planet. They had literally taken over, and no matter how hard we tried to find rare moments of respite, the understanding that we may be next began to sink in. I remember the day that changed everything. It started with one deafening sound, like a sonic boom, and our world suddenly seemed to stop. I opened my eyes, only to see the curate slowly rising from the floor. Suddenly, a strange tube-like object swept through the windows and around us. Its lights were inconceivably bright, and it seemed to search for living people in the house. With fear in my heart, I knew this could be the end of us. So, I decided to play dead until the machine had gone. But much to my dismay, the tube-like object seemed to sense the curate had woken up, and before I could do anything to help, it snatched the curate with its metal tentacles and flew off into the night. The last thing I heard from the curate's mouth was an agonized scream that I will never forget. At that moment, my life changed forever. I had been through much in my life, including this war, but this was the one memory that would haunt me for the rest of my days. 10. The stillness. I waited till the tube left the house. The only noise was the haunting screams of the curate. I then left just moments after it left. I have to leave, as if I didn't, I could be caught. My heart pounded as I crept through the darkness, looking for any sign of life in this desolate landscape. The smell of the strange plant filled my nostrils as I made my way through the overgrown roads and paths. Everywhere I looked, the shapeless scarlet masses spread in every direction. As I peered closer, I could see glimpses of some of the buildings it had taken over. The walls were just barely visible behind large red expanses. I kept my eyes and ears open as I walked, watching for any signs of Martian technology. I could hear them buzzing far off in the distance, but for the most part the machines had moved on. I kept my head down and walked cautiously, careful not to disturb the red weed and break my cover of anonymity. As I went, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of life. I wanted to find someone, anyone, who could help me. I prayed that someone had survived the invasion, and I find some shelter. I had no idea how long I had been walking, the sun had long been swallowed by the sea of red, the stars twinkled through the haze of the night sky. I felt uneasy and vulnerable as I approached an unfamiliar area, searching for any sign of movement or activity. I saw nothing but the crimson foliage surrounding me, and finally, after a while I started to feel calmer and began walking with a renewed sense of confidence. As I continued walking, I thought of the curate and his words. He had promised to help us, but he was gone now. I wondered what had become of him, and if he had managed to escape from those machines. I silently vowed to find a way to free him, if he was still alive. I told myself to keep walking, put one foot in front of the other. I thought about the future, where would I go from here? I remembered the curate's words, they echoed in my mind as I put one foot in front of the other: stay strong, stay brave, keep searching, don't give up. I kept my head down and tried to focus on the future. I knew I had to keep going, I had to find some sign of life. 11. The work of 15 days. I trudged along, exhausted yet resolute. 15 days I'd now been walking, after the Martians had taken over the world with their red weed and their terrifying ability to lay waste to land. Everywhere I looked there were blackened ruins, as if some great firestorm had swept through and incinerated everything in its path. The stillness was perhaps the most unsettling part. All my life, I had grown used to the sounds of street chatter and forests alive with birdsong. This was true deathly silence. I was baffled yet determined to somehow make it to London and see if there was any hope. I had unknowingly taken on the challenge of a lifetime, walking through towns and villages that had been reduced to blackened ruin, totally silent, desolate, and deserted. At first, I had been elated to see that the Martians were not here. I had wanted to confront them and show them that I was not one of the people who cowered in fear at their alien presence. After months of living in the face of their might, it felt good to be able to step out, albeit cautiously, and be within their realm and yet not be seen. But then I started to notice that the Martians had moved on, and that their presence was still felt, in spite of their physical absence. Everywhere I went I could see how their influence had left an indelible mark on the landscape: the red weed, the empty streets and the blackened remains of once thriving towns, all testament to their power. I realized, in that moment, that man's empire had been quickly and effectively taken away from us by creatures that were composed entirely of brain. I knew in my heart that the Martians, unhampered by the complex societal systems that make up man, made and used bodies according to their needs. They never tired and never suffered from the ailments or maladies that plague us. It was in this moment of realization that my sense of purpose reignited in me. I know that I have to make it to London. I need to see if anything has been left, if the earth has been given a chance to repopulate, to rebuild. I take a deep breath and continue on, my feet beginning to ache as the days stretch further on. The Martians may have taken away our humanity, but they haven't taken away our resilience. I know the human spirit will eventually prevail in this war, and eventually, we'll all have our chance to be free. 12. The Man on Putney Hill. As I walked, I saw a house, and I heard a man scream from it, "Halt! Who goes there?" "Er, a friend," I replied nervously, knowing I was entering a stranger's territory. The voice paused for a moment, then shouted, "Wait a minute, it's you. The man from Maybury Hill." "Good heavens! The artilleryman. I thought you surely burned," I said in disbelief. "I thought you surely drowned," the artilleryman said. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'll show you," the artilleryman said. He gestured for me to enter the house. In the cellar of the house was a tunnel that had taken him a week to dig. I couldn't believe my eyes. To me, it would have no more than a day's work. The tunnel led to a large cave at the end. He ushered me into the cave and poured us each a glass of champagne. The artilleryman told me his plan. He wanted to hide the rest of humanity underground. He wanted to build a new society outside of the reach of the Martians. I thought about the stories I heard about Martian flying machines, and about him building a fighting machine to take on the Martians. Suddenly, I felt a pang of guilt. I heard of the flames and glowing red weed, I saw the tripod figures moving distantly, and something told me that I had to turn away from it all. I put down my champagne glass and knew I had to leave the strange dreamer behind. I had to get back to my own kind. 13. Dead London. The wind whispered like a grisly reminder that I was the sole survivor in this wretched world. As I walked along the empty street, the Martians that had been so relentlessly destructive were now motionless, and I could see why. The war machines were now lifeless, a testament to the humblest of Earth's creatures that had been used to defeat them. There wasn't a single sign of life, no car engines, no footsteps, only the occasional chirping of birds to be heard. But soon, another sound caught my attention, a war cry, faint yet distinct, echoing through the desolate landscape. I felt entranced by it, like a siren calling me to it, and despite all my better sense, I began to head towards the source. I didn't have to walk far before the Martian tripods came into sight. I froze in horror, fear coursing through me. It was the same machines that had brought death and destruction, now standing still in a gruesome tableau of man's defeat. I could see the birds flitting about, pecking at the red masses that oozed from underneath the hoods. It finally hit me. The Martians were dead, slain by the bacteria, and I was alive, a witness to the aftermath. I couldn't believe that something so tiny and insignificant had been able to defeat the beasts from space. I should have felt safe, but there was still a chill that lingered with me, an unsettling reminder of how fragile and impermanent life is. I couldn't take my eyes off these deathly tripods, until suddenly, the war cry stopped, and the silence was profound, only the rustling of leaves disturbed the stillness. I was overcome with emotion, I felt sad and humbled by the events that had taken place, a solemn reminder that the same fate awaited us all one day. These were the last remnants of a past conflict and a reminder of how fleeting life is. Here we are, all of humankind, standing alone in the face of insurmountable odds, but we can still persist and strive to stay safe and victorious. I slowly walked away, taking one last look at the tripods and silently bidding farewell to the Martians the way they lay, lifeless amongst the dead streets. 14. Epilogue. The Martians had died, their sickly bodies hit with the same bacteria that we had failed to eradicate. We never found out why they chose us or what they wanted so badly. All we knew was that the battles had been short-lived, but the effects were devastating. The entire planet had been shattered. Buildings in ruins, people in despair, and nature slowly but surely reclaiming what was once ours. I can still remember standing on top of the rubble that remained of the city I once called home, holding onto my brother's hand as we watched nature take back its domain. Fields of wildflowers bloomed in once desolate places, birds sang joyously, and the clouds rolled across the sky. It was almost a miracle to witness and appreciate. It was then that I spotted her. Her blonde hair and sweet smile, standing atop the highest pile of rubble we called home. Carrie. My love, my soulmate, my everything. We were reunited after 2 years, and I couldn't have been happier. I ran towards her with Tom in tow, and when we finally reached one another, we embraced tightly like we hadn't seen each other in years. Though we had our happy reunion, our joy was tempered by the knowledge that the threat of a second invasion hung in the air like a shadow. Though the Martians had been defeated, we remained cautious and vigilant, watching for any sign of trouble. We worked to protect our new home and rebuild what had been lost, with new techniques and technologies. We formed new alliances, rebuilt infrastructure, and learned how to better care for our planet so that it could keep us safe from any future attackers. We were determined to do whatever it took to protect the planet and its people, and over time, the rebuilding began. Still, the memory of that day when the Martians first arrived was always present. We always had one eye looking to the sky, half expecting them to return. It was only thanks to our vigilance and hard work that the planet was able to rebuild itself and keep us safe. We had come a long way but could never forget what had almost happened. Carrie wrapped her arms tightly around me and said, "No matter what, we keep fighting. We fight for this place, for our home, and for our planet." Tom nodded in agreement and said, "You're right. We have to be strong, stay vigilant, and always be prepared. I don't ever want to see a day like the one we experienced ever again." "We won't," I said, clinging to Carrie for support. "We'll keep fighting together and never give in. We're in this together, no matter what." And that is it. I hope you liked it, and make sure you like the video and subscribe for more videos and be notified of new videos when they come out. Bye.